Red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light.
Folks, lads and lassies, grab yourself a pint and pull up a chair. Welcome here to another episode of the Soul Sessions. I am your host, Soul, and well, this episode I think is going to be a bit on the overkill side because we have the Jaguar with the sweet smile, former Progress World Champion, former OTT World Champion, former TNT Champion, and so many other titles that I think Ultimo Drago would blush with how many titles this man has held in his career. Mark Haskins, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My friend, it's an absolute pleasure. Now, of course, Mark, with every guest I've done before, every guest has a story and every story has a beginning. Mark, how did your story begin in the world of professional wrestling as a fan?
So when I was about 9 years old, I had a friend who had cerebral palsy and we were best friends. But one day, I think I just randomly picked up like a couple of Hasbro figures from a jumble sale or a car boot sale or something. And he came to my house and he saw them because I'd seen them at my friends' houses. So I wanted to be one of the cool kids and start collecting wrestling figures, having no real idea what they were. And he saw them and he said, "Oh, do you like wrestling? I love wrestling too." So next time he came round, he brought a VHS of Bad Blood 97. And the first match I saw was Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. And it had actually, the reason why I think that I connected with it so greatly was that about a month or two before, I'd been playing football at school. I'd ended up getting punched in the face by another kid. I had a bloody nose. I got picked on a lot. So I could instantly relate to wrestling, how Shawn Michaels was like the smaller, cockier kid with longer hair. And, but wrestling was a world where he overcame the bigger, scarier boys, being The Undertaker. And, I could relate to it. So from there, my friendship, just continued to blossom over wrestling. We were wrestling mad. And it just pretty much went on from there.
Hey, fair play indeed, my friend. And obviously you talked about, Bad Blood 97 on a tape. For our younger youth audience, a tape was better. It was a great way of consuming media back in the day. But especially with wrestling, you always hear about the tape trading. I've had a couple of wrestlers on about how tape trading really is a gateway to wrestling. You can pass it on to a friend or like a car boot sale, and you just find this random tape. But I felt, especially for the UK scene, because we're a little island, we would get some of the big shows on delays, or live wrestling wasn't really a thing back then. From yourself, Mark, do you think tape trading is one of the key reasons we have such a booming scene in the UK?
I mean, that's a good question. I'd say it's definitely one of the reasons. I think it's a piece of the jigsaw. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different components that go together that creates the scene of what it was. And, in a lot of ways, I feel sorry for this next generation. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's great and it's convenient that you can just go online, go onto YouTube, type in this wrestler's name, and it opens up the potential of being spotted. I think that now's a great time in terms of being an entrepreneur within the wrestling industry, that if you're a young aspiring wrestler, you can get your name out there very easily, very quickly. And it's one of the reasons why we've had such great success over the last few years is platforms such as being on demand for certain indie companies has been a way for you to get your product as such out there all across the globe. We would have orders come in from literally every corner of the planet, and it was definitely a shock to me. You think, oh wow, this person the other side of the earth has heard of me, they're buying one of my t-shirts. It's I think that the opportunities now are fantastic, but it was definitely something about that era that was, I don't know, like it made you feel like a real, diehard fan, that you had to wait for a tape to come over from America, and you had to wait for somebody who had an American, video player and then convert it to a UK version. And there was that, I don't know, there was definitely something about being a fan at that time where you could trade tapes with each other of, hey, I've got this event, you've got this one, or you would get best ofs of a particular wrestler. And it definitely felt a lot more niche at that time, and you almost felt like you were more part of a community because you were trading things around. And the second that you found out somebody else had certain tapes that you wanted, like you felt like you just connected with them so much quicker. And I think that there's good and there's bad with every situation. I think that it was a part of that is has gone from the industry today, which is a shame, but I guess people can send each other links to, hey, check this guy out instead.
No, absolutely. But I think with the tape trading thing, especially, like, you had to you have to have a drive to find what you want. I know in the modern day and age, like you said, just a link, click, boom, you found it. You might have to install Chrome even to find it. But with, trading, you really had to have that drive to, like, if you want to watch, Terry Funk in ECW or something from Noah back in the day, you had to have a drive and find that tape. Now, also, you did mention Bad Blood 97 as well. And, Taker and Shawn, two legends of this business as well, especially with Shawn Michaels. From me, myself, I got into wrestling in 2019, so I never saw this guy kind of have a career in wrestling, but I know him as the person that's elevating NXT and crafting these new stars of, tomorrow. With Shawn Michaels, do you think his run as NXT, building these new stars, might just be as legendary as his in-ring career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guy was fantastic. And if you wanted somebody to help develop upcoming talent, that would be the guy you'd go to. I think it's a shame that there's not more people of his caliber of talent that's sticking around it, helping out the younger guys, because I think that there's almost a missing link in that sense. And it was like it was almost like he got what wrestling was going to become, being the modern age, before that even happened, because in so many of his matches, he would create moments. He would create these moments that would essentially become gifable. Do you know what I mean? Like there would be, he would have like a silly, mannerism that he'd do, or a catchphrase or something that people would be able to chant along with. And I really think in a lot of ways he was before his time, but he was definitely one of the biggest influences on my career. He was my first favorite wrestler. And I remember the first time that he retired in 1998, I was heartbroken. I was absolutely gutted. I never thought he would come back. And then 4 years later, he returns at SummerSlam 2002. And I blew my absolute shit. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't think it would ever happen. And it is mad that, to think that was only 4 years different, because like 4 years ago was 2020, right? So it definitely feels that the older that you get, the quicker the time flies by.
Oh, Mark, come on. I didn't say that. I think my hips going with just saying that kind of thing. Come on. Oh, God, I don't know. That the alcohol or just my age talking right there. But hey, fair play to that indeed. And I think with Shawn Michaels, well, you have to obviously talk about Undertaker. Two guys I think you could classify as Mr. WrestleMania. Taker with the streak and Shawn Michaels with his in-ring work at WrestleMania. And obviously, we've seen at WrestleMania 40, Taker came back for a wee little cheeky dig at The Rock and Shield and all that, WrestleMania 40. Do you think like WrestleMania 40, with how much it called back to, the old days with Rock and Taker, it was kind of a celebration of what came before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always cool to see how some of the old guys are going. Like there's definitely that sense of nostalgia, and I think that as long as those guys are capable of doing it, I would say absolutely part them in. I think it's always great to see somebody come back who's still in good nick. I think that The Rock hasn't aged at all. Like, him and Bruce Forsyth share the knowledge of where the Fountain of Youth is. Do you know what I mean? Like there's, because, he just went out there and it didn't look like he'd missed a beat, and there's definitely something about that era that those guys got, that they understood, that I think that is missing from the industry today. Do you know what I mean? Like there's definitely something. There was like guys weren't competing in terms of the content of their matches as far as making matches good. I think the athleticism now far surpasses anything from that era. But I think that there was, because they didn't necessarily have that athleticism, there was a certain essence of storytelling, of character work, of branding to each individual. Everybody had a catchphrase that you could sing along with. They were all competing with who can get the most amount of emotion out of the audience. And I think that itself is a lost art in a lot of cases, especially in the current climate of wrestling.
No, hey, absolutely, indeed. The last season of this show, a running theme was about ring psychology and, ring work and understanding that process. Now, bringing that back to now this season, I want to know your thoughts, Mark, on ring psychology. If you had to maybe teach somebody or younger coming up and give them that kind of lessons on ring psychology, is there some key aspects that you feel like need to be passed down if you're wanting to learn that?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the time you have to just kind of approach things with, the aspect of, is it going to work? I don't know. Let's try it. I think in a lot of ways, I don't want to push people into a certain mindset of saying this is the way it has to be, because in my opinion, wrestling is art and art is subjective. The most important thing is, can you make the crowd care? Because if the crowd care about something, it almost doesn't really matter what it is that you do. I mean, look at The Rock, for example. You know, the people's elbow, by all accounts, is one of the shittiest wrestling moves that ever existed. Do you know what I mean? But when you actually take it into context, you know, there's a setup. He only ever puts somebody in that position when that's about to happen. He kicks the arm in, he looks at the crowd, there's acknowledgement there. It's like the pull off of the elbow pad. It's a big production, right? Then he runs around the ring for a couple of minutes and then drops just a standard elbow drop. Now, if you said to somebody in the back, yeah, this is going to be the finish, you'd probably be like, no, it's not. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be like so anticlimactic. But then when you actually see it in principle, you're like, this is one of the best wrestling finishes ever. And it's just one guy falling over on top of another one. So, you know, what would you rather do? Have, you know, some crazy head dropping move that, you know, is potentially going to shorten your career every time you take it, or just have somebody fall on top of you and people lose their minds? Like, as long as the psychology around what it is that you do is there, I think that that's the more important thing. You know, it's not about what you do, it's about how you do what you do. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, look at how many super kicks do you see? You know, or have you seen ever, right? Now, you know, how many are as impactful as Shawn Michaels doing it? Do you know, like, one thing that I always like saying to people is wrestling is based on emotion. It's, you know, it's not a sport as such. It's not about the content that you give in the ring as far as how athletic you can be or how, you know, crazy a move you can come up with. Like, if I was to say to you, I'm sorry, I love you, what comes next in that sequence? Everybody knows it's super kick, right? Yeah, how many super kicks have you seen? And how many are as memorable as that one is? And that the reason for that is because there's emotion behind it. So a lot of the time you have to go into the ring and you have to pay attention to what is it that the crowd are reacting to. You know, a lot of the time I would start, like, originally when I was doing the sharpshooter, I was using it sort of earlier on in the match. And the more that I did it, the more of a reaction it got. And now, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to reactions, you always want to leave the crowd with the biggest reaction at the end. So I just kept bumping it up and further through the match until it eventually became, you know, my finishing move, basically, because I know that it's the thing that is going to be one of the biggest reactions that I get out of the match. And I know how to get a big reaction from doing it. I do it in a completely different way to everybody else does. I have a different setup for it. I have a different hook for it. I can deliver it in many different ways. And it's something that you can do on the majority of people, maybe except for Zach Gowen. Do you know what I'm saying? So, you know, you at some point you just have to pay attention. What is it that the crowd are listening to? Like, one thing I hate seeing guys do is do some really crazy innovative thing that people react to, and then they'll finish it off with a really bog standard move. And it's like, man, like, you're going from like here to here. You know what I mean? Like, you know, if you've done some crazy flippy twisty stuff, you know, and then, you know, you finish your match with like a fisherman suplex, it's kind of like, man, it is just an anticlimax. Do you know what I'm saying? So you have to go into things with the mindset of, how am I, you know, going to get the biggest reaction? What is it that the crowd are responding to? If the crowd aren't responding to it, don't sell meat to a vegan audience. Just go into every situation with an open mind and, you know, try and figure out how can you make your moveset, or how to make your matches as easily as doable as possible. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you don't have to overwork, you don't have to overcomplicate things. You know, for the majority of people understand, you know, standard human psychology. Like, it doesn't have to be hard. It only has to be as hard as you want to make it.
No, absolutely. You know, you could do, you know, a suplex and then, you know, a Canadian destroyer and then a, you know, shooting star press, and then everyone would be like, oh, but then you could just see something like the Rock's people elbow when everyone loses collective shit about it because it has history and meaning to it. So remember that, folks. You know, sometimes style over substance isn't the best way to go. So just focus on that.
I mean, obviously, look at the Stone Cold Stunner. Like, you don't even have to bump. You just drop to your knees. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what would you rather do? You know, like, would you rather, as, you know, Stone Cold, he drops to his ass, and he can do that to literally anybody. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, if you have a move that only some people can take, then, you know, you're not going to be able to you know, do that. If you go out in front of an audience, you know, it's kind of like going to your favorite band's concert. You want to be able to sing along with the lyrics, so people would think of the same psychology in terms of wrestling. People want to see Stone Cold stomp a mud hole or hit a Stone Cold Stunner or a Lou Thesz press. Do you know what I mean? They want to see a rock bottom in a people's elbow, and with spitting a hand and slapping someone. Do you know what I'm saying? So think about what other things that you can do, that you could do on any given night of the week, and make it as foolproof as possible.
Exactly. It works at the end of the day, my friend. Now, obviously, I can't move on from Bad Blood 97 without talking about a certain little debut, the Big Red Machine, Big Old Kane. Now, when I first saw this, obviously, I wasn't in the existence back then. I was still waiting for arrival. That, when I saw it, I was like, holy shit, that is kind of impressive. That just sells so many things. And obviously, there's been many great debuts within WWE itself. I think of The Shield, RBD coming in, and so many others. With Kane's debut, Mark, I want to know, do you think Kane's debut at Bad Blood 97 might be one of the greatest debuts?
Definitely. I think as well, when you take into account that you're bringing out a fresh character into a main event spot against an already established star, and then you're putting him in a program with him for the best part of a year. For a while they were fighting each other, and then they were a tag team, and then they went on to do their separate things. It's very hard to do that in the current climate of things. I think in a lot of ways, fans nowadays are in certain ways less receptive to new guys coming in and straight away being a main event force. Do you know what I mean? I think that at that time, because it had the hype of being the story of, the mystique around The Undertaker and how he had this sort of backstory of what had happened during his childhood. Why did he have an evil brother that was coming back to get him? There was this story, this mystique around Kane's debut. And I think that they nailed it. I genuinely think that the crowd at that time really ate it up. And that's what set Kane up to have the great career that he did. And I think as well, it helped that it, under a mask, he definitely looked like the Undertaker's brother. They were practically the same size. So as a fan, when I was a kid, I 100% bought it. I was like, man, these brothers, his Undertaker didn't even realize his brother was still alive. And coming from a heavily Christian family, the relevance of his name being Kane, stood out to me of it's the brother who's seeking revenge. Do you know what I mean? So it's I think that Kane was a hell of a talent, and I think as well at that time, I think that people were a lot more gullible, so they tended to buy into it. But when you actually look at the story of the two characters themselves, there was such an essence of a sci-fi sort of storyline behind it. Whereas I think nowadays people are kind of less into that kind of theme of a story.
Absolutely. The story of Cain and Abel, obviously Abel being the first human to murder. He murdered Cain, his brother. That's a hell of a story in itself, and reflects onto wrestling itself there. Just absolutely just shows character is key as well. And I want to know yourself, Mark. I want you to give me your Mount Rushmores of wrestling characters. 4 individuals that you think had the absolute key of character.
I think that Kurt Angle is definitely up there, because Kurt was somebody who 1 minute could be an absolute buffoon and the next minute be 100% believable as a legitimate ass kicker. He could just go from one extreme to the other in just a moment. I genuinely think that he was fantastic in the ring. He had a wrestling background, so there was that believability that this guy could just beat you up, but he could also be funny, he could be goofy, he could be silly. I think that Shawn Michaels is another guy who just, it almost didn't matter if you liked wrestling or not. You could watch a Shawn Michaels match and still be entertained. I think the average fan, some just random mum or dad whose kids were wrestling mad, they could go to a show, watch a Shawn Michaels match and enjoy it. You genuinely, enjoyed his, cheeky, sort of side, and he was super entertaining. I 100% believed everything that Stone Cold Steve Austin did. There's no point that Austin was in front of a camera that I didn't genuinely believe that was who I was looking at. Some characters can kind of come across and you're like, they're trying to ham this up here, or some things just kind of feel a little unauthentic. I 100% believe that was Stone Cold Steve Austin. There was no off switch. That was just him, And then if you're asking for one more, it's a real toss up, I think, either between, say, The Rock, who I think was, similar in the sense of being like Shawn Michaels, super entertaining, very fun. There was a certain magic around his matches. Or, you know, and the same thing could be said for another one of my all-time favorites, which is Eddie Guerrero, who, you know, was, you know, fantastic. He was, you know, he had that character down. You know, and when you look at how he did things during his whole sort of stint of, you know, lie, cheat, and steal, like it really felt like it was abstract thinking, because it wasn't something that you'd seen regurgitated from somewhere else. It was 100% of, you know, authentic coming from him. And I think that he thought in a very different way, but he still had that ability to go out there and, you know, and wrestle. He managed to tick all the boxes. You know, I think that there's, you know, you got to look at an audience in different ways. You've got those who want to be entertained. You've got those who are diehards that want to see some actual wrestling action, you know, and you've got all those in between. So if you can entertain that spectrum of people, I think guys like Eddie, Rock, Austin, Sean, you know, Kurt, they're all up there as those guys that are capable of delivering that.
Absolutely amazing names you mentioned there as well. And I want to talk about Eddie Guerrero, because I've always been fascinated about that. You know, sadly, Eddie passing away, even though he's gone, his influence is always still there. People say, look at Eddie's matches to learn. Eddie chants happen. You know, WrestleMania 39, Rey Mysterio comes out to Viva La Raza in a lowrider with Snoop Dogg to beat his son's ass, and everybody bloody loved it. And I want to know, Mark, why do you think Eddie Guerrero has such that everlasting impact? Even though he's no longer with us, his impact is always felt.
Because I believe that he was genuinely loved. Like, when you actually look back at some of the most monumental sort of moments of his career, like if you watch the hype video of him going into the match with Brock Lesnar for the championship, right? Like when he's confessing his sins basically, and he's saying, yeah, I have screwed up. Like he comes across so humble, and you can feel it. That's the difference, is that the people who are, you know, the guys who I've named, you can feel their presence. You can feel what it is that they're doing. You can feel their character. And when it's not something that you watch, it's not something that you hear, it's something that you feel from within of like, yeah, I get that person. Like I get that guy. And I think that, you know, Eddie, for a lot of people, can remind people sort of subconsciously of, say, that cheeky uncle they've got in their life, or, you know, that naughty pet, that, like, you know, that naughty dog that's always stealing your socks or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that in a lot of ways he was so relatable, but he was also such an incredible talent. Like, some people may have one individual aspect, but I felt like he had everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, he had the character work, he had the in-ring ability, and he had the ability to make you feel such a range of emotions. But also as well, I think that especially when you get into wrestling and you start focusing on the details that, for the most part, probably go over the majority of fans' heads, right? Things like footwork in the ring. If you watch how Eddie did things and you just watch his feet, you see things from a completely different perspective. You're like, good grief, that guy was another level, because the way that he moves is like a dance. It's you know, he doesn't take any unnecessary steps, and he moves so fluidly and so perfectly, and it makes things so smooth that as a performer, and if you take a step back and actually look at things from a performance perspective, you're like, dude, that guy was incredible. Like you know, as a fan, I think a lot of the times you take things for granted. You just think, oh, that guy was really good, but you don't really understand what it is that makes him good. It's like watching a master chess player and you're paying attention to the moves he's making. And it's only once you're a trained mind that you then start to pick things out and you're like, oh, he wasn't really good. He was really, really good. Do you know what I mean? So I think that he speaks to so many people in different ways. To fans, they loved him. To wrestlers, they loved him, but they also see the absolute perfectionist artist that he was in terms of how he did things.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I think it is just amazing to see that, even though no longer with us, still has an influence in the business to this very day. I would love to ask as well, Mark, obviously you mentioned, you know, having a new mindset when you get into the business and seeing things differently. Was there ever like a wrestler you watched and thought as a fan, oh, not really into it, but then when had a trained mind, you thought, holy shit, this guy's on another level. He's actually on it.
I think I thought that about a lot of people, particularly Eddie and Sean. And I think that there were certain wrestlers that like, for example, right, I think of somebody like Bret Hart as somebody who, if you're in the business, if you're a fellow wrestler, you see what he does and you appreciate it so much more because he does things in a way that is almost speaking in code, where people appreciate it, where like, oh, that was really clever how he did that. But I think that it goes like, you know, kind of similar thing. It goes over the majority of people's heads who are just watching it as a casual spectator. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's definitely some wrestlers. There's nobody who springs to mind off the top of my head other than the names mentioned. But I think that when you do make that shift to being an aspiring, you know, being an aspiring fan who wants to be a wrestler, to then actually getting in the ring and seeing what it takes, you start to look at everybody differently. Do you know what I mean? You start to think like, oh, that guy was really good. Well, you start to take things away from people where you're like, oh, you can just do that. Instead of making things really hard, you can just, you know, go straight there. Do you know what I'm saying? Or particularly setups to things like I'm trying to think like Eddie's a good example, like in the sense of, you know, say a buckle pad needs to come down. There would be a way that it would almost organically happen. Like maybe he's in a hold and he would reach and he'd be reaching and he can't get anywhere and finally grabs the buckle pad, but the guy tries to pull back and the buckle pad comes off. Do you know, whereas some younger guys, particularly when they're having their first few matches, they think there needs to be a ref bump or there needs to be, you know, everybody needs to be wiped out. It's almost like they go around the block to get next door. Whereas, you know, if you can find the path of least resistance and be able to do things in a very subtle way that, you know, saves you a ton of work, then that's when you really start to become a master of your craft.
Wow, I mean, hey, definitely got to be taking those kind of craft lessons, and you know, maybe you too can build the Mona Lisa and be a perfectionist and make it all look lovely as well. Now, Mark, obviously, something I've been very, very fascinated about when talking with people from the UK in relation to wrestling is how our scene has evolved. You know, I've heard stories of how back in the day it was maybe one or two schools within the entire UK, and now we have so much going on. For yourself, when you know, once a fan is always a fan, decided to get into the squared circle, what was the UK scene like at the time for yourself?
It was so different, man. Like it was so different. For example, right, it felt like you had different pockets. So you had at the time, you had one PW that was kind of like a British version of TNA at that time, because you had a lot of the guys coming over, guys like Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Abyss, you know, but you also had former WWE guys. So you had maybe say like a Mick Foley or a Matt Hardy or guys like that. So they all kind of contributed in their own way. And it made it this very kind of like hybrid thing, but it was also very sort of diehard wrestling fans, same as FWA at the time. Like I was a big FWA fan. And if you knew of FWA, you really were a diehard wrestling fan. Like it was kind of like it was almost like knowing of like a really cool indie punk band that hadn't been discovered by everybody yet, sort of thing. But then you also had things like All-Star Wrestling that was strictly family. Like you go to an All-Star crowd and nobody there really knows who you are. They're just there to, you know, it's like pantomime. They want to boo somebody, they want to cheer somebody. And at that time, you think in 2006, Brian Dixon could offer you 30 dates in the month of June alone, right? So he was running a business at such a scale that nobody in this country, from my knowledge, has been able to you know, even rival that. He'd be running, say, 2 or 3 shows in the space of the same day. You know, like when we were doing the camp runs, for example, there were times where you would finish up a camp show at, say, you know, the camp show would start at, say, 3 p.m. You'd finish it by, say, you know, 4 or 5. And then you get told, oh, you've got to be, you know, can you come and do a town hall somewhere else in the country? So you would literally drive from one venue to another, and, you know, it could just happen on the spur of the moment. You know, and I think that there was that mix of, you know, he had so many dates, but it taught you how to wrestle in a different way. And because you had to entertain families, you know, I was very lucky. I was very fortunate that I was wrestling for, say, companies like what Rev Pro was originally IPW back then. So yeah, that audience was more sort of like your diehard wrestling fans that wanted to see action that was exciting. Whereas, you know, you go to all-star wrestling show, and it was more families, it was more, pantomime, it was more engaging. But then I got to wrestle for a company called Premier Promotions down on the South Coast, which was still running the old school British style rounds matches. So that was completely different again. You would only have 4 matches to a show. You would have 2 in the first half, intermission, then 2 in the second half, and the main event would go on directly after the intermission. And the reason for that was because if, conventionally in British wrestling, the last match that would go on would be a match that you could potentially miss if you wanted to, but it was just a little match that would keep people happy to go home on, because if people had to run off and catch their trains, then they wouldn't miss the main event, which it was that they paid for. And that was completely different as well, because you had, what would it be, like 6 5-minute rounds, 2 out of 3 falls over those rounds. So you had to learn how to wrestle a completely different style again. So I was very blessed. I was super fortunate that I got to do all these little things, whereas I don't think for the most part that really sort of occurs that much anymore. And I think that it's a shame, because when you learn how to entertain so many different audiences, you suddenly realize how much there is to learn at this game.
Wow. I mean, that kind of round style thing, that sounds crazy. I mean, maybe we could bring that back, maybe talk to DK, get that an all in at Wembley just for the shits and giggles. I mean, hey, no, who knows? But I want to ask something as well, Mark, because I feel like culture as well influences people's and obviously the world. And now with the UK, obviously we've got Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. For yourself, do you think like each part of the UK has their own kind of breed of wrestling?
Not necessarily, but they have their own breed of fan. So, for example, you go somewhere like, a lot of the time when you went to London, it felt like fans were a little bit more stuck up, and they were kind of a bit more like, well, entertain me, like make me, shout. Whereas if you went somewhere else in the country that didn't have like a lot of wrestling, they were just excited to be there. So they were like, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like you go somewhere like Swindon, where like for the most part it's very chavvy, do you know what I mean? And because I had longer hair, straight away you'd go, oh, get a haircut, do you know what I mean? Like you kind of get that almost like towny mentality, do you know? But there's it would really vary. Like, I've always found that going to Scotland, like people appreciate you being there. They're like, yeah, come entertain us, like we're super up for it. But what's interesting as well is that the more you travel around the world, the more you start to notice this differently. Like, because in Ireland and Canada in particular, there seems to be a strong like fight culture. Do you know, like my uncle who's Canadian, he says, anytime he'd go to the hockey games, because it always got violent there, he'd say, I went to the fights and the hockey game broke out. Do you know, because it became well known that at the hockey games, people were going to get into a scrap. So I found that my style from 2015-16 onwards, when I got to Canada, I could go out in front of an audience that I hadn't been in front of before, and people straight away ate it up, because it was that intense style. It was, I'm just going to get stuck in, and people enjoyed it because that was the culture of the area. Whereas, some places you go, like say you had a show in like Leamington Spa, for example, or, say Stratford upon Avon or somewhere like that, it's more kind of pantomime. It's more, we want to see goodies and baddies, whereas if you have a show in say Portsmouth, like people just want to see a scrap. So it can vary from area to area.
Fair dues indeed. And there's a lovely amount of variation as well. And I want to talk about one company you mentioned there, 1PW. I know they've came, they've gone, they came, they come back again. It's kind of like, a cockroach.
Habits die hard.
They're no dying, mate. They're just habits at this point. I mean, I know you've had some killer matches there as well. And one I want to talk about is obviously you faced RVD on a 1PW show as well. I mean, that must have been quite a high match, I must say.
Literally. And it's very fitting that today is 420, eh? So
it is.
Some things just line up, man. But I'm not gonna lie to you, it was. And I mean, part of that was just to try and get through the match. So I actually suffered an injury a few days before, to the point where I couldn't stand up like 2 days before. Like I think my hip flexor went into spasm. So it was a relatively small injury, but dude, like I could not stand up. I couldn't put any weight on my left leg. So I managed to, see a physio. I managed to foam roll out. I took, multiple painkillers, on the day. And got jacked up on pre-workout and Red Bulls and then went out to the ring. I was like, there's no way that I'm turning this down. Like, I'm not pulling out of this match. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, Rob Van Dam was also one of my faves growing up. Like, I didn't want to, lose out on that opportunity. So going into the match, like, I was gutted that I couldn't give it everything that I wanted to give it, because every single little move that I made, even so much as walking, I was just anticipating any second now I'm going to be in agony. And it's weird because you can sometimes go into a match like this, and then when you come out the other end, you actually feel better by the end of the match than you do going into it. It's something to do, I think, with moving and keeping the area going, and also as well, I think that adrenaline is a hell of a thing.
Adrenaline's a hell of a drug indeed. I mean, who knows? Maybe if you grab a bong and light it and then say RVD 3 times, it might pop out and you get another dream match.
Look into the mirror at midnight and just do this over and over and he'll appear.
Oh, Jesus, that's something to think about indeed. Now, obviously, 1BW did come back last year, and obviously they had a few shows. I know you were in a world title match. I believe it was a 4-way. Lance Archer, Cara Noir, and Ospreay were there. I want to know your thoughts on that sort of the vibe of this reinstation of 1PW. Did it seem promising? And then, what was it about?
I'm so gutted it ended the way it did. Like, so gutted, dude. Like, Frankie Kazarian came over and he walked around the back and he comes outside and he just goes, this isn't an indie. This is a pro. This is a professional wrestling company. He was like, this is not like your indie company at all. It's not what he expected. Like, the production was so good. You get to the show that day, you get told, hey, we need to do a pre-tape. Come out here, we'll film this. You go and film something. The guys who work there, they're incredible crew. You would film something that day, they'd have it together, ready to go on the screen that night. I've filmed promos for companies, years ago that I'm still waiting to come out. Do you know what I mean? Like, they really had their stuff together, man. And it was so gutting that it just ended the way it did, because walking around show 1, I was like, if this is show 1, this place is going places. Like, it had everything. It had excitement. It had, many different matches that appealed to so many different aspects of your crowd. It had huge crowds. You know what I mean? Like, the production looked incredible. I genuinely believed if they figured out a way to keep it going, there would be no company in the UK that would be able to touch it. Like, it was so well put together, and I'm gutted that it ended the way it did, because everybody was looking at it and really hoping that it was going to pay off into something huge.
Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe it could come back. Old habits die hard. I mean, if 1PW did come back in some variation, Mark, what would you like to see the company end up achieving?
I would really like to see, whether it's 1PW or any other company, I really want to see a company in the UK that is able to tour and give people full-time contracts, right? That's the one thing that nobody has been able to do in a very long time. I think that if you compare the UK to, say, Japan, right, in terms of the size of the countries, they're relatively, similar sizes. You've definitely got the talent pool in both. There's huge talent pools, but in Japan you've got numerous companies that have regular TV deals. And I'm not saying that you necessarily need a TV deal, because look at the way that things like the internet has changed the wrestling industry. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that it changes so much. A lot of the time, if I want to get better at doing, say, like wrestling promos, I watch videos of, say, somebody like a Mr. Beast explaining content, how to provide content. And there's certain things that he does in terms of content, of like, you need a strong hook in the first 4 seconds, because a lot of people are just scrolling. So you need to do something that catches people's interest. It's like, and then it's that keeping that retention, right? So I think that the old ways of doing things could be, for the most part, eradicated in a lot of ways, because I don't think that it's relevant to this current climate of things. Like, you have to have things that gets people interested, that hooks them in. I think that a promo has to be 30 to 90 seconds tops. Like, if you're doing 5-minute promos, I don't think that you're going to have a strong enough retention rate for it to deliver what it is that you need to do. Like, if you can get done in 10 seconds what you could get done in a minute, then why wouldn't you just make it quicker? Because that's going to help so many. It's going to change the algorithm. It's going to change the amount of flow that you get to your the amount of attention that you get. And I also think as well is that it sucks that it's like this, but like generally bad opinions tend to get 9 times the amount of views. Like, the things of the saying that basically bad news gets spread 9 times faster than good news. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can have, and trust me, when I say things that are sweet, if I'm being supportive, if I'm, trying to be really nice, it gets nowhere the amount of traction that I get if I make a really smarmy, nasty comment about somebody. Then that's when, like, people start chiming in. And in a lot of ways, I don't think that it's kind of hard, because I don't think it's necessarily good guys versus bad guys anymore. I think that you have to be kind of equally both. Like, if you look at the guys in the world who are the most influential, or the guys who get talked about the most, like, look at, say, like a John Cena, for example. He's like Marmite. People either love him or they hate him, but either way they're talking about him. Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's not just specific to wrestling. If you look at guys like Donald Trump, if you look at guys like Andrew Tate, do you know what I mean? They have, people who, they either have followers or they have haters, but they have people that feel one way or another. And then that creates conflict. It creates people talking back and forth, and that therefore creates attention. So it allows your brand to grow. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of sad that it's like that, but that's the truth of the situation. Like, you have 2 types of people in business. You have people who tell you how it should be, or you have people who react to how it is. So you have to look at the current climate of things, and you have to think, okay, what is it that I'm doing that creates a reaction, and what out of that reaction creates money? Do you know what I mean? Like, years ago, I started a brand called Scurll Indie Wrestling, right? And it literally happened because a friend of mine, Nathan Cruz, was at my house, and I think one day we were just practicing promos, and we were like, well, what could we do a promo about? And we'd seen some videos by Mark Andrews and Eddie Dennis and Pete Dunne online. And, because we were roaming in different circles and we were highly opinionated that what they were doing wasn't the way to do things, we were like, hey, we could really get fired up with this. So we did some promo, and then I was like, why don't we, because they got Defend Indie Wrestling, why don't we bring out some t-shirts that say Screw Indie Wrestling, I'm a pro, right? So we did, and they sat in my house for like 2 months. I did nothing with them. I was like, these t-shirts are just collecting dust. I was like, I don't think I'm going to do anything with this. And then Cruz wore a t-shirt out on the show and sold a load off the back of this one appearance. And I was like, oh, wait, we've got something here. So we went and we were like, okay, well, let's redo let's film a promo and, find a reason why we're mad, and find something for what it is that we stand for. And let's make a story out of it. And when we did, this was in 2011, 2012, maybe. We put a video up online before, videos on YouTube were really a thing, and it got thousands upon thousands of views. And we were like, okay, I guess we Screw Indie Wrestling now. Like, we it's almost like Richard Branson says, it's like, say yes to whatever it is that you're doing and figure out how later. So it was something where it was like, okay, we've done this, and now it's got a response. And okay, so how can we keep acting on that, that response? And there were those who hated us and thought what we were doing was terrible. And there were those that were like, yeah, you've got a point, man, screw those guys. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the weird thing, is when you realize the people that are agreeing with you, because they think that you identify exactly as they do in their mindset in terms of a certain situation, and they're like, yeah, man, screw those guys, like, I've always hated them. And you're just like, like, I actually like them, I want to work with them, I just have this angle that I'm running with. So yeah, I would say that it's weird, but like, you have to react to how it is, and probably in 5 or 10 years time it's going to change again.
And then there'll be people shouting from the heavens, bring it back to the good old days, stop changing things. Oh, why? But, time moves on. We have to make some changes. Now, of course, when I've had American wrestlers on and I mentioned the UK scene, a lot of them mention one company in particular, and that is Progress. With what Progress has done for the UK scene. I've had the current co-owner of Progress, Lee McAteer, on the show, hearing about it. And one thing that he took really to heart and humbling was how I talked about a lot of young UK wrestlers want to wrestle for Progress. They see that as their dream destination within the UK. Mark, why do you think, especially with a lot of younger wrestlers now, Progress is that dream goal for people?
Because I feel like the Progress run that occurred, right? It went from being this grassroots movement to being almost like a badge of honor. Like if you'd wrestled for Progress, you'd done something in this country. Do you know what I mean? Like it was a company that went from, like, I remember I got an email from them before that very first show saying, hey, this is John and Jim. I think it was just the two of them at that time. They were like, we're going to be running a show in London. We'd love to book you for it. Right. And at that time, there was this idea that running a show in London was a terrible idea because people had tried and just hadn't drawn very well. So we were like, I remember I got the email. I was like, good luck with that. Do you know what I mean? And didn't respond to it. And then after the first show, as soon as the first show happened, there was like this buzz, this hype around it. And I was like, oh, like, I'm so glad that there are people out there that think the complete opposite to me, because I don't have all the answers. Do you know what I mean? And if somebody genuinely believes in what it is that they're doing and they have that incentive and they have that work ethic that John and Jim have, then yeah, they're going to make something happen. And straight away it was like, damn, like there's something about this company that felt special. And then, it just continued to grow and grow. And I came on board officially at Chapter 7. And there was this, man, like it just felt so special at that time. It was in the garage. So it was only, say, like 350 people, right? I think maybe 400 tops. And I was like, man, it's not going to get any better than this. And then they moved to Electric Ballroom. And then they're packing out, 800, 900 odd, like every single show. And just each show continued to get bigger and bigger. But then there started to be these little, building blocks along the way, when I think one of the first matches that they had abroad was for a Progress Championship over a WrestleMania weekender. And then that felt really special. And then they got mentioned on, say, like Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast. And then William Regal turns up. And then next thing, they're doing an entire show out in America over a Mania weekender. And then before you know it, they're doing, bigger venues. Like, I got to wrestle at Brixton Academy in front of 2,500 people. And I didn't expect a grassroots indie company to be able to reach that point. And then they move from there to Alexandra Palace, and then they go from there to having a tour in America, and then from there it becomes wrestling at Wembley, and it just continued to grow and grow and grow. And you went from being I hope something takes off to this really is taking off. And the things that I noticed as well is, like, whenever I travel around the world, I go to different countries, and the mad thing that I found was that people would always come up to me and say, I saw you at Progress when, right? Now, I'd wrestled for, say, like PWG or TNA, and, before I got signed to Ring of Honor, the shows that they'd done over here. But the ones that I always got recognition for wrestling for was Progress. So it made me aware that there was so many eyes on this one little indie company on a global scale that they were changing the game.
Mate, absolutely 100%. Now, of course, I did mention in the intro you were a former Progress. Well, I better get the belt itself, because why not?
Is that the real belt?
Well, it's the replica. It's the replica. They sold
okay.
them. So yes, you held this, obviously, and before it was a staff, right? Before this baby, it was a staff.
Yes,
yeah.
Championship.
Yeah, that's weird. I mean, thank God you didn't have to hold the staff, because I mean, it's something. But yeah, of course, you would hold this baby. You would defeat Marty Scurll, obviously, in a triple threat with Tommy End, for current Malakai Black. I want to know about that match, that moment. Defeating Marty to win the championship. Very rewarding for you, right? Hearing about the first show, then getting to be on it with the Chapter 7, and then continuing. What did it mean for you in that crowning moment to win this one?
That was one of the most stressful days of my life, right? I don't know why it was, but I had like a bad energy that day, where it was literally from the moment I woke up, it felt like so many things went wrong. And at that point, by the end of the match, I was just so glad that, like, we got through it, and that we'd got to, like, now I was like, I can finally take a sigh of relief. Do you know? And I remember I grabbed the championship and I pulled it in as close as I could, and I was holding it. I was sat down, and all I could think at that moment was, I wish I hadn't pulled that championship in so closely, because I just head-butted it and my head really hurt, right? So I'm sat in front of like 2,500 fans just losing their minds, and I'm like, man, I've got a headache. But after that, it was great, man. Like, I remember standing up and holding it up, and man, like, it was one of the best moments of my career. It genuinely was. And it was very humbling for me to go from, starting out, you wrestle in front of small crowds of, say, the smallest crowd I think I've wrestled in front of was like 10 or 15 people in some community, college or something. And, community hall. And then, you're there in Brixton, O2, 2,500 people losing their minds for you, culminating your story and becoming the champion. And the great thing about it as well, the Progress Championship bout is genuinely probably the best championship bout I've ever had the privilege of like carrying around, because it is so light and so malleable. I don't know how the replicas are, but the actual one is great. The Smash Championship that I won a few months before, because they had this really thick, big Smash logo in the middle of it, dude, it weighed a ton. Like when I had to take it to Canada, they wanted me to keep it so I could defend it in the UK. But when you put that in your bag, like your bag is, so heavy, you have to take so many of your clothes or merchandise out just to fit it in. It was like, oh man. But yeah, so the Progress Championship is genuinely one of the nicest championships. And it was great being in there with those guys as well, because I'd come up with those guys. I met Tommy first in 2007, probably the same as Marty. And, at that point, all of our careers were blossoming and moving on at the same time. So, I was in the ring with, for my favorite company to wrestle for with, two good mates. So it was, man, it felt like it all kind of came together.
Oh, absolutely as well. And I tell you what, the replica is definitely lighter. It's not as heavy as that bloody AEW replica, which I had to pull out my bag, bring it back from the States and carry it because it bloody put my bag over the weight limit. But needless to say, I wasn't spending 20 quid on the baggage thing. I'm saving that money. But obviously, I know you would hold the belt and have two title defenses against Zach Gibson and then Jimmy Havoc and Marty Scurll. And I believe you had to vacate the belt because of injury, correct?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I want to know how you react and the mindset of, we want to do great things and we want to go out the way we would like to go out, obviously with a championship reign. Knowing that had to end prematurely because of injury, I just want to know, how did that make you feel?
Man, it sucks because the thing is, so I had some shoulder issues at that time. And basically the physio said to me, he was like, I've been treating your shoulder for a while and there doesn't really seem to be that much improvement. So I think that this could be actually an issue with your neck that's going into your shoulder. So what I want you to do is go and have an MRI scan to see if that's the case. So I go and have an MRI. They were filming the Progress documentary around that time. So I took the filmmaker along with me. They film it and basically he breaks it down. He says, like, look at these results. Like, basically you've got the neck of an 80-year-old. I would advise you retiring because I think that, all it's going to take is one wrong move and you're going to end up hurt, right? Like you could end up seriously hurt. So I was like, man, like that's soul destroying, right? And I go and speak to Yestin Reese, who's fellow wrestler. He's worked a lot with rugby players and he's also a physio and he really knows his stuff. If you're looking for somebody to train you, then speak to Yestin Reese. He's incredible. Like myself, I'm also a personal trainer. If you're looking for help in terms of the gym, then reach out. But Yestin is somebody who I've gone to multiple times for advice. And I took him my results. He looks at it. He goes, yeah, 2 weeks of rehab and you'll be fine. Now, the emotional roller coaster you go on between the two of being like, your career's over, like the dream is done, and being like, yeah, man, just do a couple of these exercises and you'll be all right. I didn't know what to think. Do you know what I mean? I was like, what? Like, how are they so completely different? He was like, look, to the average person, this is going to sound bad. Like, so for example, I had 2 or 3 discs in the stage of early degeneration, maybe 2 or 3 discs that were bulging. And my cervical spine is straight where it's meant to have a curve to it. And I had something known as cervical radicalopathy, which is a narrowing between 2 vertebrae that was impinging on a nerve, which was causing the issues in my shoulder. So I remember that at that time I was getting headaches, like, my arm was burning. I was thinking, man, like, this isn't like good signs. And I would never have forgiven myself if I'd gone to give somebody a move in a match and my arm had given out and I'd hurt them. Do you know what I mean? I felt like the responsible thing to do was I got to resolve this issue and then I can come back and pursue this. And so inevitably that's what I did. And I went and got 2 or 3 more opinions of, I believe they were spinal surgeons in the area and other physios. And they all said the same thing. They were like, nah, you're good, man. Just keep going. You've got, I mean, Is it ideal? No, but you've got the neck of a 28-year-old who's being dropped on his head for the past 10 years of his life. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of comes part and parcel with the industry. So I've been very conscious since then of strengthening my neck, of being more cautious in terms of what it is that I do in the ring. And also as well, trying to relay that message on to kids, because I was the same. I never listened to anybody. I'd be like, old timer, what you want about? Do you know what I mean? I'll be fine. And then suddenly one day you're like, oh, this stuff does add up. Do you know what I mean? So you got to be a little bit more conscious of not destroying yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like the best careers are the longest ones. So, be smart with what it is that you do.
Oh, absolutely, man. Don't throw caution to the wind. Actually listen to the wind, because the wind might actually be speaking sense sometimes. And I know as well, you get to go to Ring of Honor, sign to Ring of Honor, and do many great things there. I would love to know, because I've had some wrestlers come on the show and they say, "Oh, I would love to go abroad, but I'm always nervous about making that jump. I don't know what lies for me. Things could be uncertain." And yourself going to do Ring of Honor, I want to know, how did that all come about? And maybe somebody who wants to do stuff abroad, what kind of advice would you give for them?
So how it came about was, I remember I had one show for them in Liverpool. I don't remember how I got that booking. And from there, they saw me. They were like, okay, we'll give you another show. And when they came back around, I think I wrestled Jay Briscoe. And Jay, I don't think was aware of who I was, and he's fair enough. Like, I go into every situation expecting that whoever I'm working with has absolutely no idea who I am. And I think the same in terms of when I go out in front of an audience. I'm like, these people, think like these people don't know who you are. So you have to really make a statement. You have to make an impact, and you have to really convey who it is that you are and what it is that you're about. And because I went out there with Jay, who was considered as one of the mainstays in Ring of Honor. Do you know what I mean? Like, he was one of those guys that was kind of like not like the golden child, but he was like the benchmark there. Do you know what I mean? Like, multiple time tag champ, former world champ. Like, if you could hang with him, like, that's how you earned your stripes, sort of thing. That was how you sort of thing. So I remember, dude, I went out there, and like, I came back afterwards, and he was like, man, like, that was great. Like, he loved it. Like, and I felt that getting his respect was like a kind of like a badge of honor. Do you know what I mean? And it was off the back of that they were like, all right, cool. If you can get him to like you, do you know what I mean? If you can get Jay Briscoe's respect, you must have something. So it was off the back of that they were like, right, come back. We're going to have this international cup, and they wanted me to be a part of it. And I ended up wrestling Jonathan Gresham on night 1, and then Flip Gordon and Adam Page on night 2 in the Doncaster Dome, actually the 1PW stomping ground, and then won the International Cup. And that meant that I got a title shot against Jay Lethal on the 3rd day in York Hall and Bethnal Green in London. And I went out there with Jay Lethal, and I think it was August, so it was so hot in that venue. I think we wrestled for about 45 minutes, and it was off the back of that they were like, right, we want you to come to America. This was August 2018. They had the guys like Cody and Kenny and the Bucks departing around December. So they were like, you're going to come in and you're going to be a part of this new group of Lifeblood in January 2019. So it was like the rebuild, basically. And yeah, it was from there that they'd seen me a few times. They liked what they saw. They saw, hey, we got potential to do more with you. So they brought me in to give me a run and see what it was I was capable of. And man, like, I gotta say thank you to them as well. Like, during COVID, so my last show for Ring of Honor was going to be, man, this is so gutting. I was going to wrestle Roosh for the Ring of Honor World Championship match at Las Vegas, main event on the 18-year pay-per-view anniversary pay-per-view. And basically our plane lands in Vegas, and they're like, shows are canceled. So we were like, what? And then I went to them. I begged them. I literally begged them. I was like, look, because we'd heard of this COVID thing, and because I'd been speaking to Carrie Silkin, who was one of the guys that formerly owned the company, but really knew his stuff in terms of business. He was talking about how on-demand services were up because games were cancelled and people were sat at home. So they were like, cool, well, we're just going to watch on-demand. So I literally begged them. I was like, look, let's still have an event, because if people can't be here, then at least people will be watching at home. Like, give it away for free on Facebook or whatever, because if people can't go anywhere, then they're going to need to be entertained. And they ended up just filming some matches that they released at a later date. And I was so gutted, man, because I was like, look, we could be the first company that does this. And it ended up being WWE that did that and took that route. And it was like, man, like, you know, you could have been the first one. You could have been the trendsetter. Do you know what I mean? You could have been the one that, you know, that it could have got more eyes on the product. And when we were sat at home, they continued to pay us, man. Like, they didn't, you know, dock our pay or anything. They took care of us so well during COVID. And during COVID, all I cared about was being a better asset for them when I came back, because of how well they took care of us during that time. And I'm just so gutted that the company, that version of the company folded essentially, and, you know, moved on, because I didn't get to repay them in whatever way that I could for them taking care of us so well. And the thing that I would say to young aspiring wrestlers that are they worried about going abroad or doing something different? Like, look, like, you're always going to have a reason to do something, and you're always going to have a reason not to do something, right? At the end of the day, right, you're not going to grow if you don't get out of your comfort zone, right? You have to become comfortable being uncomfortable, because that is a place of growth, right? Like, if you're not pushing yourself to do something you've never done, then how the hell are you progressing in any way? Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, when you have your first match, are you nervous about being in front of an audience? Yeah, like, absolutely. That just continues, it continues, it continues. And guess what? There is no point of your career where you're going to feel, yeah, I'm ready for this. Like, you're always going to have doubts. You're always going to have nerves. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember watching The Undertaker's documentary, and he's saying, like, about how he needs to come back at WrestleMania every year and have another match because he didn't feel like the last one was enough, and he didn't feel like he gave enough during his career. And you're like, that's one of the most iconic wrestlers ever. How have you not given enough? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like, everybody knows who The Undertaker is. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. You will always have a reason not to do something. Do you want to listen to that voice of doubt, or do you want to listen to the voice that says, get your ass up, get out there and do something? The goal isn't perfection, because you can't get any better when you're perfect, right? The goal is progression. So keep progressing, right? Like, here's the thing, and I'm not suggesting this, but if somebody can't swim, one of the best things they possibly could do is get dropped in the deep end, because you figure out how to swim very quickly. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying to anybody, please don't take this as advice, that if you can't swim, Mark Haskins said jump off a bridge, because that's not what I'm implying. What I'm saying is that when you start competing with people on the next level, whether that be in terms of an actual sport, right? Like, you know, there are those that if you played a master at something, you might lose a million times over, but that level of, you know, of mastery is going to rub off on you in some way. And then you might find that if you play somebody else who was previously on your level, that you're tons better, because you've got better by, you know, losing to somebody who's way better than you. Do you know what I mean? Like, you are a sum of the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with. So if you hang out with a bunch of, you know, unaspiring losers, guess who's going to be the 6th unaspiring loser? If you want to really make something of your career, make something of yourself, then you are going to have to step up, and you're going to have to be in dressing rooms with people who are able to help nurture you and help push you in a different direction.
Hey, absolutely, mate, indeed. And it is really taking that initiative to be your own self and finding the will to go and do things that may seem nervous, but you're going to achieve. I mean, I wish we kind of that match for the Ring of Honor Championship. I mean, I got to be honest, Mark, I definitely would think you would have looked good with this belt around your waist as well. I mean, I think, I swear I'm not a prop master. I'm not a prop. I'm not just going to pull out random bunches of props from like a bucket somewhere. This is just convenient if something happened there, because when you reorganize a studio with a bunch of belts, things just lie down everywhere. That's the last of the props. But I wanted to know, obviously, with Ring of Honor, I'm very interested about, you know, because I've had Marty Scurll on the show, and he was obviously the head booker, and he talked about building the product at the time, you know, with like the Pure Championship coming back and doing things of like having scoreboards and making it feel different. You know, during that time for Ring of Honor, obviously with the Elite going over and forming AEW, do you feel like Ring of Honor was on the cusp of building its brand new identity before the pandemic hit?
Yeah, things were looking so promising. Like, it is so promising, man. Like, it really felt like people were coming together. Like, you know, little things in terms of like how things were being set up in the months previous to that. Like there'd been such a push to make the company better, and everybody was on the same page with that. Do you know what I mean? Like people were thinking, okay, well, how can we do this differently, or how can we do that differently? And this is the thing as well, is like when you have competition in the marketplace, you either sink or swim. You know what I mean? Like look at how much WWE has changed since AEW came along. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, you look at, say, like the Monday Night Wars, right? And you had, say, like WCW, you know, WWF at the time was a relatively stale product, right? And then it took WCW to come along and hand them their ass for, you know, months, if not years on end, for them to then think, okay, well, we're getting our ass beat here. How do we switch things up? How do we make things better? Right? So the competition sometimes, you know, some people crumble under competition and some people step up and, you know, fight back. And it's, you know, it's a weird thing that, like, you know, in a lot of ways, like sometimes a bad thing can be the best thing to happen to you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, say, for example, like look at boxers, you know, who maybe lose one fight and then they vow to themselves they're never going to lose another fight again. So they come back so much better that they go on to greater heights had they, you know, as opposed to if they just, you know, won every fight that they'd had. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, look at the career of, like, you know, Money Floyd Mayweather. Do you know what I'm saying? Like he lost at the Olympics when he probably should have won. And then ended up being like, well, okay, I'll take this loss, but I'm going to go and make my, you know, professional boxing career the best that it can be. And he's arguably one of, if not the best boxer of all time. Do you know what I'm saying? So, people have like weird mentalities around things. It's like, you know, sometimes you have to get your ass kicked to figure out how to, you know, fight back and how not to get your ass beat so bad. Do you know what I mean? And I felt like Ring of Honor lost a lot when those guys left. But it definitely felt like, okay, well, we've got to step up here because we want to be part of this conversation and we wanted to get eyes on the products. And it brought in new guys, but that made things fresh. It made things different. And, you know, man, like things would have been so different if COVID hadn't have happened. And I'm just gutted that things happened the way that it did. But I genuinely believe that Ring of Honor would have gone from strength to strength to strength and would have, you know, it really started to feel like things were on a roll, and then lockdowns happened and sort of shut that all down.
Yeah, man, it's truly just a shame, man. Obviously, you know, Ring of Honor, it still exists. Obviously, it's owned by Tony Khan now. Sort of a different product now. Obviously, we've got great things like Athena, women's champion, who's been absolutely killing it. Mark Briscoe's now the Ring of Honor world champion. Well deserved for him to honor his brother Jay. I do want to get your thoughts, though, Mark. Obviously, someone who's a part of that Ring of Honor brand before TK's buyout to what it is now. If you do watch the product, I want to know what your thoughts are on what Ring of Honor is now.
I'm glad that so many people who I know who are good people, who are incredible talents, have somewhere that they can go and play their craft. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, like, you know, Eddie Kingston and Mark Briscoe, dude, those guys are so good. Like, who wouldn't want those guys at the top of their, you know, their talent pool? Do you know what I'm saying? And yeah, you know, like watching Mark Briscoe's press conference interview where he's talking about his brother Jay, and he's, you know, he's crying, man. Like, I had tears in my eyes. Like, even Vic was crying. Like, you know, she's a stone cold bitch. She doesn't cry at many things, and she's, you know, she genuinely, tears are streaming down her face. And man, like, you know, I'm glad that so many guys, like, look at like Kyle Fletcher, right?
Yeah.
You know, Ring of Honor has allowed him as a young wrestler to step up and really start to make more of a name for himself. And it's mad when you actually look at like the pay-per-views that they're putting on. Like, there's some stacked shows, man. Like, you know, I think that it's a shame that Ring of Honor didn't have the backing from somebody else that could make them a real big third contender, rather than being, say, arguably a second brand to another company.
No, absolutely, indeed. You know, that Mark Briscoe Eddie Kingston match, man. I mean, I know a lot of people cried at Cody and Rock, but that one's a tearjerker as well, and I truly did love that match as well. And obviously, coming back to home with the UK as well, you're obviously a former TNT World Champion and TNT Ultra X Champion as well. And TNT is a fun brand in itself, you know, having the crossover shows with GCW, and they've got great tournaments going on as well. For yourself, Mark, going into TNT and what that kind of company is about and its sort of style, is there a different mindset when going into that?
No, I don't think so. Like, there's I mean, that kind of is in a way of, and this is something that probably a lot of people don't notice, but so TNT for the most part, and I don't know if it's changed recently, but for the most part I wrestled there is standing room only, right? So people are always standing. So it actually makes a difference in terms of what you do, because I felt like anytime you went to the mat, so like a lot of my offense is submission based, right? But the second that you went to the mat, because people couldn't necessarily see over the head of the person stood in front of them, you didn't get a bigger reaction from something that might get a reaction elsewhere because people can't see it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is something that you don't really take into account, is that, you know, the ring canvas is, say, 3 foot in the air and you're suspended, but then if people are stood on top of that, once you're down on the mat, people can't see past a certain level. So it felt different in terms of what it was that got a reaction, because, say, for example, like somebody hit somebody with a light tube, like it's a big audio, people can hear it, people can see a big explosion. Do you know what I mean? So those things tended to get more of a reaction than, say, a really good technical match, because people wouldn't be able to see, oh, this guy did a really cool reversal out of this into this, and you'd lose your drama as soon as you went down to the mat, unless it was a pinfall. But once again, people can hear it, like, you know, people wouldn't react as much. So it almost became its weird little style in itself, where I tried to make things interesting and exciting while adapting my style to the audience that was watching there.
No, hey, absolutely. I mean, I do love the company. You know, I take Mayfair, who's the current TNT World Champion. I've had him on the show. You know, he actually beat another guest of the show, Shay Monet. I remember I was getting all celebration graphics up, and I was like, oh shit, got to change that and throw out the fucking window because shit's changing on the fly. But managed to celebrate that nonetheless. Now, obviously, within the UK, great things are happening with the big companies coming over. You know, Scotland, we're getting a PLE. Yes, no 8 hours traveling down south. And we've got AEW All In coming back as well at Wembley. But I would love to talk about, obviously, you know, formerly Impact, now TNA. They did a wee little tour as well. And I know you faced Leon Slater for the North Championship at the same time on that show.
Yeah.
I mean, Leon, he is an exceptional talent. I want to know, what was it like getting that opportunity to wrestle him for the North Championship?
He makes me feel so old. He genuinely does. I saw him, I think it was first time in, what was it? It must have been like January 2022. And he was in a dark match for North Wrestling up in Newcastle. And just from point to point to point, he just continued to blow up. And, you know, man, like, so just for context, right? He's only, what, like 19 years old?
Yeah.
This year, I would have been wrestling 18 years. So I've been wrestling almost as long as he's been alive, right? So when you take that into context, I'm like, damn, like, you make me feel so old, man. You know, and he's a good guy. He's a good kid. Like, you know, I like him. And I think that the sky's the limit for him. He's very humble, but he's also very smart. And yeah, he, in a lot of ways, with how he does things, he reminds me of Pete Dunne. Do you know, like, you know, Pete was always somebody who, when putting something together, never felt like he had to get anything in. He was always very giving for other people. And I think that, yeah, Leon's very much the same. You know, he's very selfless, and he's very, you know, just aware that he can be Leon Slater regardless of what it is that he does. And I think that the sky's the limit for him. I hope that, you know, he continues to get better and better and better.
Absolutely. I mean, I am praying to the wrestling gods above. Leon Slater versus Mustafa Ali for the X Division Championship.
Oh, that would be sick, wouldn't it?
Please, please. With my left kidney. Oh, come on. I'll do it. Let's make something. But obviously, you know, I mentioned AEW All In coming over, and I've done WrestleMania in Vegas, not in Vegas, LA, and that was a fun experience there. But having that sort of like Mania weekend experience home in London with so much was going on was really fun. And I know you obviously faced the real master of the GTS, Kenta, for the Divide Championship. But I want to know about that whole experience of that whole weekend, being a wrestler from the UK and having that Mania feel at home. That must have been like just proud and joy, right?
Yeah, and it's really nice that you're not jet lagged doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's, yeah, that's the one thing about those Progress weekenders. Like, man, they were awesome, but dude, did I spend half the time just like, you know, guzzling coffee or anything to try and make me feel more awake. You know, you literally, for example, we went to New Orleans, right? So I think we had to catch like 2 or 3 flights to get to New Orleans. We land on the Friday, and then the first show is at like 10 a.m. the next morning, and I'm wrestling Will Ospreay, who was like IWGP junior heavyweight champion at the time. So, you want to be able to go out there and perform like you do, but you also get there and like, you're so knackered. You're really trying to think like, okay, like just have as many Red Bull as you can, and like try like anything to wake up, like it's go time. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it was great, man. Like it was nice that I wasn't jet lagged over that weekend, and Kenta was a huge inspiration for me early on in my career. Around the time of say 2006, 2007, I used to live in this really crummy little apartment in Portsmouth, and one of my best friends used to come around, and we used to watch Kenta matches on a weekly basis. And I was always like, one day I'm going to wrestle him. And this also goes as well to a story of like, there's been so many points in my career where I've wanted to just sack it off and just quit and go and do something else in my life. And I remember one piece of advice that my dad gave me years ago, which is arguably one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me, right? I remember saying to him, I was like, Dad, I'm thinking about quitting wrestling because I am so fed up of dealing with idiots, right? And he looks at me and he goes, Mark, you are going to deal with idiots in every walk of life. So you may as well deal with idiots for something that you love rather than for something that you hate. And that's always stuck with me because, sure enough, like you deal with, say, like your kid's school, and like you suddenly realize like, oh, the teachers here are just, absolute buffoons. So, like they're not dealing with situations the right way or whatever. So, you change schools, and, fortunately for us, that worked out well. But, things like that, you suddenly realize like, oh yeah, like, everybody is just a person, and like there's so many people that are unorganized. And I think that to some extent you always kind of anticipated that it was just with wrestling, you know what I mean? Whereas, it wasn't. So there were so many times that I've wanted to quit, do you know what I mean? But I haven't, and I've kept going. And it's like, okay, well, how many more times are you going to give it one more go? And I'm so glad that I did, because 17 years on, end up wrestling one of the guys who was a huge inspiration for me, being Kenta. And yeah, went out there, man, and like, he's great. Like he genuinely is. And I'm so glad that I got to do it at a stage of my career where I felt like I could go out there and really give him, one of, a good performance. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that you can look back and think like, oh, I wish I'd wrestled this person when I was ready, rather than, feeling like you weren't. But no, on that occasion, man, like, I was absolutely buzzing. And that whole weekend was great. I got to go to All In, and I got to watch, and it was so good to see so many of people who I've worked with across the years go out there in front of that audience. And it was nice just to let my head down and just watch a wrestling show as a fan for once, and not have to be worried about running around in the back. It was weird. It was almost like suffering from PTSD. I was like, I'm at a show and I'm not like, trying to get my gear on in time, or like make sure that I can make it to the toilet before my music plays, or like whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? So it was nice just to be like, oh, I have nothing to do except watch. Okay, I'll take it all in. Do you know what I mean? So it was great, man. It genuinely was.
I just like to imagine you're just like hearing the bell go and you're trying to rip off your trousers, get your boots on, and people are holding you down like, Mark, you're not in. It's like, well, I have to rest. I was like, no, calm down. Just enjoy the show. Have a fun old time. Obviously, last year's All In, Ospreay was there, and he got that moment against Jericho. And now this year, being signed to All Elite Wrestling, like he's main eventing. I don't give two shit what anyone's saying. Ospreay's going to get that main event. I want to know, from someone who's wrestled him in the passings, what he's doing now. Will Ospreay main eventing? Do you think it would be a picture perfect moment for him to win the title at this year's Wembley?
I think that's what a lot of wrestling fans want, right? Is who's the guy that's come from my area that's made it, right? And I think that if you were going to tell that story with Will Ospreay, that would be the stage to deliver it on. Or, you do something similar with what they did with Cody, where it's like 1 year it's heartbreak. So he has this long year of, building his character up and really, overcoming the odds. And then he comes back a year later, even bigger and stronger. So, yeah, I think that would be ideal. And it's also very nice as well, because I remember the first time I met Will, I was wrestling him in a 4-way match. And I think it was Paul Robinson that came up to me. He clued me up. He was like, just so you know, Will's a big fan of yours. And I was like, bullshit. Do you know what I mean? I was like, he don't know who I am. Like, who's this little kiss ass trying to like pretend that he knows who I am, right? Because in my mind, I was like, only 6 years into my career, I didn't think like it was at a point where I'd have a fan who'd then become a wrestler. I was like, whatevs. Do you know what I mean? Like, didn't believe it for a second. And he came up to me and he started, he started calling my stuff to me. And it was stuff that I hadn't done in a while. I was like, oh, you really know my shit. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've studied me. Like, what the fuck? Do you know what I'm saying? And I was like, I went out to the ring, and like, also as well, like the amount of times that you hear this guy's going to be the next big guy, it's like, yeah, of course he is, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't think it. And then like with Will, I was like, oh no, like he might actually have something. But I wanted to be very cautious of the fact that the style that he started off doing only has so much longevity, right? Like that takes a toll on your body. And so I was always very conscious of like, trying to say to him, like, what you do is incredible. And like, yeah, I wish I had half of your athleticism, you know what I'm saying? But you also have to take into account, like, what's the longevity run out of this? Like, there's been so many guys that have gone out there that have been super humble, super athletic, and then it's destroyed them, and then it's ended their careers early. And with Will, that hasn't been the case. And he's just got better and better and better. And it's, dude, I'm so glad to see him go from being that skinny little kid who, I didn't believe was, liked my stuff or whatever, to now being arguably one of the best wrestlers ever, man. Like it's very good to see. I'm super glad for him.
It truly is. It's humbling as well. And the fact that he's going to wrestle the American fucking dragon, Bryan Danielson, tomorrow at Dynasty, that's like, oh, fucking yes. That's going to be amazing. But you can't speak about Bryan, obviously, because he's in the last year of his career. And I felt like this year in wrestling especially has been rewarding. Cody finishing the story, Mark Briscoe getting the Ring of Honor World Championship. I want to know, Mark, as a UK wrestler, how would you feel if we at Wembley got Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness?
Ooh, that would be exciting. Damn. But you know what's mad though? I feel like only a certain percentage of people would understand the true relevance of that story, and I think that it would take AEW really, going through the backlog of footage and explaining the whole story. I think that would be incredible. I remember that. I remember when they wrestled in Liverpool and Nigel McGuinness ended up headbutting a ring post repeatedly for about 10 minutes, right? Because I saw him the next day and he had two massive black eyes. And I was like, oh, you weren't working that. That was just sheer carnage. Like, I remember seeing, I saw him with sunglasses on, and then he got into the ring and I'm like to warm up or whatever, or to train. And I was like, he's not even taking his sunglasses up. Oh, he has. Oh, damn, those eyes are black. Like, they were big black eyes, man. Like, they were, dude, you know what I mean? And Nigel's awesome. But this is the weird thing is that, I notice this a lot when talking to wrestling fans that, come up to the merch stand, or, seeing younger guys get into the business. Like, a lot of people aren't that like hardcore diehard wrestling fan anymore that would go back and study everything. Do you know what I mean? So I think that to guys like us who might understand the concept behind it, the story behind it, I think that would be awesome. I'd love to see that. I think that would be sick. But I also think as well that like you wouldn't want to alienate a percentage of the audience from seeing the true relevance of what that match would mean.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, that ROH United show, fucking hell, that's a match and a half. I do want to ask though, do you think it would be an extra cherry on top on the story if Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness at Wembley Stadium was a pure rules match?
That'd be great. The only thing I would say is that you have to be very conscious that some matches, particularly with like rounds matches, right, is because they haven't been in the mainstream for such a long time in a very relevant way, that sometimes the easier a story is for people to understand, the better, right? So you might find, like, I've definitely found this before, you might do a rounds match in front of an audience that hasn't had a rounds match before, and they don't understand fully the concept of it, or how you can do this or can't do that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that if you're talking about what is the biggest possible reaction that you could get? Just let them go at it. Do you know what I mean? I think that like a pure rules match would be sick, but like you really need to have a big production behind that to explain, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the relevance of it. This is the importance of the rules. Like you need to make that abundantly clear so that everybody gets on board and understands it. Like if you had them in pure, rules matches week after week after week for like 6 to 8 weeks in a row in the lead up to that, then people are going to respond quicker and easier once they're on that big scale, right? But if that's the first time that you do it, I don't want to be a pessimist, but like from experience, there are certain crowds, if the rules haven't been explained fully or demonstrated, then it kind of like loses the context, or it kind of loses the connection with the audience, which you wouldn't want to see at that scale. You would want to see them go out there and kill it.
Absolutely. It sounds great on paper, but the execution could be, not the finest. Things have to be built up and presentable. Now, something I've been very vocal for is I would love for AEW, either on the Zero or to have a UK Battle Royale showcase, showcasing the men and women of this country, getting an opportunity like that on a grand stage. Now, of course, you'll be there, Mark, and I'm sure you'll be kicking ass as always. But I want to know if you could see some other men and women wrestlers get that exposure on a grand stage, who would you love to see featured?
Well, top of that list, I would say, is Leon Slater, but it looks like he's already doing that with TNA. So screw him. He makes me feel old, and he's already got his piece of the pie. So, move on. But no, let me think. Luke Jacobs is somebody else as well who, has impressed me a lot over the last year. I think that he's really finding his feet, and I think that he's somebody to watch out for. Ricky Knight Jr. is also somebody else who I think has a potential to be a real star. I think that he's very much got the mindset of he wants to do it. I feel like he has the mindset of he's got big shoes to fill, and that he's continued to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like he has broken out and done his own thing, and I think that he would be great to see. I think also as well Ojimo, Michael Oku, he would be somebody who I remember doing a training seminar in London years ago, and he was in the training seminar, and he was by far probably the most entertaining person at that thing. There was a bathroom in the corner of the room, and he gets shut in it, and then it's a 4-way match. He's one of the guys. He must have either he was peeking through the door, or he must have known a cue. But there's like a 3-way down in the ring, and suddenly you just hear the toilet door banging, right? And he comes out and he makes his comeback from the toilet, and he's like super fired up and super charismatic, and he's so over the top. It was like hard not to enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? Like it was almost like a mission. If you wanted to make it like a real challenge, try and not enjoy him, in one of his matches. Like he's incredible talent. So yeah, they're definitely some of the guys that I'd like to see on that scale, making a big name for themselves and continuing to build their reputations.
Wow. I mean, that would be very cool indeed. And I'm sure when you win it, you can be like, hey, I'll cash in my opportunity, and we can get you, Swerve, and Ospreay in a triple threat for the main event at Wembley, just because that would be
great. That would be great. Dude, there's been so many matches that I've had that have happened in front of audiences where you're like, man, like if only we could have that match now. I remember in Germany years ago, it was like Sami Zayn, Malakai Black, and myself in a triple threat match, or like Malakai Black and myself versus the Young Bucks, and wrestling, Swerve Strickland, and I know that I had a triple threat match with him somewhere, and I can't remember who the third guy was, but it was another one of those stacked matches where you're just like, it might have been like Sami Callihan or somebody, and you're like, damn, like if there'd been more eyes on the product at that time, like this could have really been like an even bigger deal.
Oh, mate, I mean, that does just sound overkill, doesn't it, my friend? But Mark Haskins, my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on the Soul Sessions. But before we wrap up, I want to offer one final question. Say in the future you get an opportunity again for the Progress World Championship, and you're able to win it. I want to know, what would that mean to you? You had your run cut short before, and now you'll be given an opportunity to now represent a company that a lot of young wrestlers want to come. It's their dream goal to be a part of Progress. How would that mean to you to be a representative for Progress Wrestling as the champion?
I think that it would be super important for me, because I've gone from being a guy who saw the company start, helped build it from the ground up. And, now, I mean, when I first wrestled for them, I was probably about over 10 years ago now. Damn. Oh, it was 11 years ago. It was in 2013. That was it. I believe it was around the spring or summer of 2013. So 11 years later, being a guy who's now in his prime, being, somebody who I really feel can help add to young upcoming wrestlers and really set a certain standard of what it is that I think the standard should be. I think that Progress has, it's made a lot of changes in the last few years, and it's always a company that's really meant something to me. And it's something that I want to see it surpass the heights that it once had. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember when we first did Wembley Arena, and there was almost like this feeling of like, well, we've done Wembley now, like, cool, we've ticked it off, we've done it. And I'm like, yeah, well, let's do it again, and let's make it bigger, and let's do more. Do you know what I mean? Like, we did SSE, so why don't we do that big Wembley Arena across the road? Do you know what I mean? Like, continue to grow, like, keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, man, like, there's part of me that's a perfectionist, and that's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you're never satisfied, but on the other hand, you continue to get better and, continue to push yourself and just try and do the best you can in every situation. So, yeah, I felt like I never got the run as Progress champ that I would have liked to have had. And I think that I've never been at a point in my career where I would be able to give more than I can right now. Like, I'm fully aware, the majority of my career is probably behind me, right? So coming out of lockdown, I wanted to come back to this business and be able to create new memories, to create better memories, create memories in this later stage of my career, and be able to help nurture people and help them become better versions of themselves, and really talk from knowledge and experience, and, understanding things from a completely different perspective, because there is so much that goes on. Do you know what I mean? And so many different aspects of this game, right? So I'm at that point in my career now, right? Like, I don't know how many years left I've got in this game, and I want to be able to just give myself to this as much as I possibly can, because the last 18 years have flown by, right? So even if I've got another 10 or 12 years in front of me, the older you get, the quicker it goes. You know what I'm saying? So I'm super blessed. I'm super grateful that I've had the career that I've had, and I'm so grateful that I'm still here to continue to do it. So, the most that I can, whatever it is that I can give. Do you know what I mean? I think, like, too often you can take things for granted. A good friend of mine, Chris Travis, he died, right? He died of cancer years ago. And the one thing that stuck with me that he always said before he died was, I wish I'd lived in the moment more. And I wish that I hadn't been worrying about what was coming next, or feeling that I wasn't good enough. I got to wrestle my heroes. I got to wrestle them in front of packed houses. And all I was doing was worrying about what was to come, and worrying about shit that never happened, right? And at some point, I've been there. I've not enjoyed situations that I've been in, that I've looked back and been like, man, we had it so good and we didn't even realize. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's what I do is before every match now, I take 5 minutes to go outside. I do some breath work. I meditate. I pray. And I'm just so fucking grateful that I'm still here doing something that I love to do. And it's something that started at the age of 9. Do you know what I mean? Very few people can say when they're a kid, I'm going to be a wrestler, and actually go and fucking do it to the extent that I've done it, right? But I've done it. And I've got the experience, I've got the knowledge, and I've got the capabilities to really go. So, whatever this later stage of my career is, dude, I'm just grateful I'm still here. I'm super buzzing, and I don't think I've ever been more passionate than I am right now. So if you want to utilize somebody who's an absolute perfectionist, who's really passionate at what they do and really fucking good at what they do, then fucking book me! I'll give you everything I've got. It's real simple. I'm here to make the game better. So utilize me while I'm still here.
Amen to that, brother, because I definitely think hearing a new Progress champion, Mark Haskins, would look very good. And of course, you would have to sign this as well to add to my set and make it more perfectionist as well. Man. Well, Mark Haskins, my friend, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the Soul Sessions. And folks, if you have loved what you heard from Mark and want to see the journey of this man himself, I will put a link to his Instagram in the description of this video. You can click it, follow his journey. And when he becomes Progress World Champion again, you can say you were there when you heard him proclaim it here on this very fucking show. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in. I would, do the whole YouTuber stick, but it's 2024. This has been around since 2005. I have faith you know what you guys are doing. Well, folks, finish your pints, put your seats away. Thank you, and remember to pull up that seat again for more episodes of the Soul Sessions.